Appreciate you hopping on here with me. I've worked with you several times. I mean, as far as the records that I brought you, whether it be with Kelsey or whatever, but we've never actually had like a conversation. The times that we've been in the room together or whatever, I'm like, giving you mixed tweaks, or you're explaining why.
Working.
Yeah, we're working. So start from the beginning for me. I mean, where are you from, and like when did you move to Nashville, and what for?
I grew up in New Jersey, just south of New York City. Grew up on like all that New York City TV, radio, hip hop, going into the clubs, CBGBs, like all this great stuff. Worst bathroom in the world, CBGBs. Well, it's gone now, but and then I actually started going to school for electrical engineering and business, and decided that I would rather be poor and interested than secure and bored out of my fucking mind. So the only school I could afford that the audio thing seemed really cool. So I looked around, and the only school that I could really afford was MTSU. So I went down to MTSU and did that, which was amazing, and spent all my time in the studios, like all night, every night, whatever. And then you get an internship, and this was back in the day, right? So internship, and then that turned into assisting, and that turned into engineering, and very quickly mixing. And, here we are. So that's the very brief version of that.
Well, I had no idea you went to MTSU. Did they have like an audio course there that you were in, or was it more like just standard courses, or what helped you by going to MTSU?
It was a RIM program. They had 3 fully functioning studios, and, we had classes. You could book the studios in 4-hour blocks. And I figured out that if I booked like 8 to midnight and 4 to 8 a.m., no one would book the midnight to 4 kind of section or whatever. So I was just in the studios all the time, constantly. It was
Were they only teaching Pro Tools at that time? Were they teaching what DAWs were important?
Well, since this was like 10 million years ago, they had Pro Tools, they had Waveframe, which was an older DAW that a lot of video places use. And I don't know what Waveframe turned into. I had Digital Performer, like I had my own computer with Digital Performer. So I would use that a lot. And then they still had tape machines, right? Like we learned all the tape machine stuff.
Yeah. I noticed you still have tape machines in your studio. How often are you using those now?
Not a ton. It's the tape machine behind me is actually my buddy Pete Lyman's from Infrasonic Mastering. Really nice ATR, but we were working on a project and we just wanted to see what it sounded like on tape, and it sounded great. It's like so if people want to use tape, we can do it. I let it be their decision because it's more money. It's just a little more expensive.
When you were at MTSU, were you playing in any bands? Were you a musician like on that end, or were you more in the studio learning how to mix?
I was in the studio. Growing up, I sang in some bands, played piano, played a little bit of drums, sang in church choir, stuff like that. But I was more interested in the engineering side of things than the performing side of things. So, and that's kind of where I gravitated towards.
In church, I had my start in church, like as far as playing drums on the worship team or playing guitar, that was like my first musical introduction. Like, and that's really the only thing I thought about, like, of what this is a path that I can do, be involved with this. My parents are proud of me. I can do this. When did you realize like music or mixing was like a for real path that you could pursue?
When you realize that there's something that you really want to pursue, it's the thing that you find out that you don't notice time passing while you're doing it, right? You don't need to eat, you don't need to sleep, like you're in total flow state. Anyone who's lucky enough to find that with anything in their life, like grab onto it and do it. So that's where I found myself with mixing. Like I just loved it, and I would look up and it would be hours later and I hadn't even noticed, or whatever. So I just kind of naturally fell into that for whatever reason.
Did you start out like using outboard gear on your mixing primarily, or did you start in the box, or like what was the early stages of you learning?
Oh no, like the first record that I legitimately mixed was a Christian hip hop record for a group called Grit. And I mixed it on an old 4000E at a place called the Salt Mine. That console had come out of Power Station. It was Bob Clearmountain's console at Power Station. So it was all outboard. We had Roland reverbs and lexicons and 1176s and the whole 9 yards. And for a while, a bunch of that stuff was all on tape. For a long time, Nashville was 32 track digital and 48 track digital. Pro Tools kicked in more and more as that progressed, and then they went away from the digital tape machines and straight to Pro Tools.
Dude, that's so interesting to me because as a mixer, last time that we worked together, a lot of stuff, if not most of it, was in the box, correct?
Yeah, a fair amount. I mean, I still have a ton of outboard gear and a console, so I just kind of hybridize it. Whatever works best is what I end up using.
What I'm getting at is like some of the plugins that are coming out that claim they're as good or whatever. Do you feel like they're getting closer in the past 3 years, or do we still lack that sonic depth that those hardware units give? Because I just now got an LA2A, and dude, I feel like I've been missing it my whole life. Whenever it gets in the signal chain of my vocals. And that was a big studio upgrade for me that I felt like without that, I don't like just plugging into the front of the Apollo no more,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it really kind of depends on what you're looking for and wanting to do, because in the early days of digital, there was stuff that didn't sound super good, right? Now there's stuff that does sound good, and it's a tool like anything else. But, you can buy a decent guitar, you can write a great song on it, right? And you can play some good guitar stuff, and then you strap on like a 59 Les Paul and put it through a Marshall Plexi, and it's like, yeah, that's amazing, right? So for the people that are lucky enough to have that stuff, does it make a difference? I think so. I mean, it just feels better to me a lot of the times, but there are also times when plugins sound better than the analog stuff would. So, I mean, it's just the right tool for the job.
What gave you the drive to make a career in what you've done and, that leads to where you're at?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know that I'm necessarily the personality that fits this job super well, because your ego takes a beating when you're working on records, like a lot, and especially when you get good at it. People. It took me a long time to figure out that people were calling me because they wanted what I did and they trusted me. But, when you would send something out, all the feedback would generally be negative. Well, this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong. And I was like, what the hell, man? And I had to realize that they were assuming that most of it was right. Otherwise, they wouldn't even call me.
That's right.
That's a hard lesson to learn, man. Imposter syndrome is a really real thing. We all struggle with it. Every creative that I know, from people who are just starting to people who make like hundreds of millions of dollars a year, we all struggle with it. The trick is just grasping that it's a human condition and like dealing with it and moving on. It's still hard. As far as growing up, man, the town I grew up in New Jersey was a mile square. Like, it was tiny. My dad was a salesman for the company that made like mason jars. And back when they had like Wishbone salad dressing and Skippy peanut butter in like glass jars, he was a salesman. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. We didn't have a ton of money or anything, but back then in those days, on a salesman's salary, you could actually afford to have a house and 2 cars and send your kids to college. Unfortunately, that doesn't really happen anymore. Yep. But I was fortunate that was available to me, at least, although I don't know how much I've used my college degree. Sorry, Mom.
Did they were they supportive of you moving to Nashville? Was that a thing like, oh, this makes sense, or was it like, what's he doing? Well,
hell no. I think my grandmother said, she's like, music is an avocation, not a vocation. Like, it's a hobby, not a job. Yeah, they were not happy that I gave up what they saw as like a normal, like secure career to go and do music. I don't think they started, believing that this was like a serious option until like a couple of Grammys showed up.
Dude, I totally get that. So whenever you moved to Nashville and you started getting traction and you noticed the phone was, consistently ringing, what was the opportunity that you got where it's like, okay, or did you even realize this is the game-changing record, or this is the session that's going to really open up my career, or, what was that switch flip,
I never even gave that a second's worth of thought. Like, for me, every record was the record. It's what you're working on. I want everything to be great, right? Like, my only concern was that whatever I was doing today was a little bit better than what I was doing yesterday, right? You can never plan that stuff, and you never know, right? You never know. And who knows? Maybe if I had moved to LA instead of staying in Nashville, my career arc would have been, obviously it would have been different. Maybe it would have been way different,
Yeah.
But I love Nashville, and I when I initially moved down here, it was crazy, man. Coming from New York City to Nashville was like, what is going on? But now I'm glad I used to say I got stuck here, and now I'm glad I got stuck.
Totally. I'd say, man, you have a pretty sweet studio over in Green Hills. Like,
I realized really quickly that moving around from studio to studio, like a lot of people did, was kind of my nightmare, right? Because when you're mixing, every time you go into a new studio, you're kind of guessing. You don't really know what the low end is, and you don't really know what you're hearing, and it was exhausting. So very early on, I was camping out. So I camped out at this place called Recording Arts over by Centennial Park for like 5 years. And then I camped out at Soundstage, in the middle room for I think almost 6 years. And the whole time I had always dreamed of having my own studio. So, I was just constantly looking at real estate. And then I figured, man, if music goes to hell in a handbasket, at least I've got a house somewhere. And my wife actually found this house in Green Hills, and there was a room in there that, was a nice space for a studio. It actually ended up being a nightmare, and we had to rebuild the whole thing. But, I just figured, like, if I'm going to pay somebody to do this, I might as well pay myself. And that's where we ended up.
What would you have to say for the encouragement of people making music in their bedrooms? Like, what are the essential things they need? Because, I mean, me and you both, we have more than we need to create. But, like, what are the essential things for people that want to do the quality work?
The essential things are a really great work ethic and determination, and the knowledge that if it sounds good, it is good. I get this question a lot, and we all like to talk about gear, but the thing that's really the most important is having a room that's treated well and a pair of speakers that you can trust. I get stuff from people sometimes where I'm like, oh, okay, you made this in a drywalled room with a pair of Mackie speakers, because I can tell from listening to it there's this weird cut in the mid-range and like all this stuff. It's amazing to me how many people go out and buy all these expensive microphones and preamps and converters and all of that stuff, and then they throw up a pair of speakers against a piece of drywall, and they're like, cool, my room's good. And then they you see it if you go online, everyone's like, I can't get everything to sound right, I can't get this, I can't get that. And it's like, if we dealt a little bit more with room acoustics, I think everybody would be a lot happier.
Dude, that's so true. I'm dealing with that too. I used to have a treated studio, and I was so spoiled with. I had a studio at Soundstage for years, and between pub deals, I moved to my house. Really, I was getting a terrible vocal sound, so many reflections, and that's where I really, even after success and after years into my career, I didn't understand the importance of having a treated room. And I've recently moved out to Hendersonville, and I'm building out a studio here, and it's just made a world of a difference having the right treatment, having bass traps, really, the bass traps. And a lot of people, when they're building a studio, they don't want to spend, $400 or $500 on these big things that just hang out in the corner. But it is an essential mixing. It has to happen, especially if you're mixing on monitors. I do a lot in headphones, but I always check with the room and monitors.
I mean, the biggest thing, if you want to be a great mixer, is teach yourself how to listen. And I mean, like, not just listening to mixes. My teachers at MTSU made us sit down and actually diagram out songs. So you're listening to the arrangement, and then you're breaking it into pieces, and then you're listening to effects, and you're listening to EQ and all of that stuff. And it sounds like boring, but man, it made a huge difference. That, and I did a couple years doing classical recording at the Aspen Music Festival, and that teaches you a whole different level of ear training. Like, it was crazy how much ear training doing classical music teaches you. There's so much great stuff out there. There really is. I think the UAD stuff sounds phenomenal.
Me too.
I think it's great. I could do an entire record with a couple of UAD plugs, Fab Filter, Sound Toys, Soothe, Oak Sound Soothe.
I'm not
definitely.
With that. No, see, I got to write that down.
Oh, really? Oh, man, I just changed your life.
I'm for real. Yeah, I never heard of that.
And then, I'll buy anything Valhalla puts out. I think all their stuff is great. I still use Massey stuff. There's some really cool stuff in there. Some really fun new stuff. There's this company called Kazrog that makes something called True Iron. It's an emulator of like Transformers, which I use transformers on my mix bus just to color the sound. This lets you do it on that or on individuals. It's freaking awesome. They just released True Dynamics. That's amazing too. I use Wave stuff all the time. I use Metric Halo stuff. Like, I mean, there's just so many tools out there. But the ones I just mentioned are kind of like the key ones. I mean, if you want to geek out a little bit, there's some really fun plugs to use on vocals. I use True Iron on vocals all the time. And for some people, it's a subtle change, and for some people, it's night and day. I mean, Chesney's vocals and True Iron, for whatever reason, is just like, boom, perfect.
Really?
I love the UA, like, LA2 plugin on vocals. There's a company that makes something called the Retro Color. There's a Retro Color plugin. I'll use that to add just a tiny bit of distortion, or like you said, what was it, Decimator or Decapitator. Yeah, and a lot of what's in Decapitator is hidden in Echo Boy. Like, there's all kinds of crazy distortion in Echo Boy. You just shut the echo off and go to town with all the other things. I have a feeling that Ken took the Echo Boy stuff and amped it up and then turned it into its own distortion plugin with Decapitator. I love Phoenix. Crane Song's Phoenix is really good on vocals.
Yeah, dude.
Stuff like that. I mean, it's kind of like whatever works. Soothe, that Soothe plugin has been a lifesaver on vocals, especially when you get someone with that ice pick to the forehead, they have that frequency that's killing you. This will just dynamically chill that out. It's amazing. It's like a really, really great version of a multiband, dynamic multiband compressor, but it's so much more intuitive and so much faster, and I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, download it, throw it on a vocal with its stock setting, and you'll just be like, oh, okay, got it.
Totally. I love that. When was the first time that you were I guess just getting groceries or whatever, and you heard your Kenny Chesney mix come through the sound, or what was that like? And how long into your career was that? How long were you grinding it out before you had that kind of validation of okay, I'm doing the right thing?
It's funny. I was just talking about that the other day. It's fun when you hear a song and you're like, man, that sounds good, because let's face it, we're all listening for what something sounds like, and then you realize that you did it. That's like a trip, right? It's a nice trip. The first time, I mean, I'm sure that it happened a lot, but the first time I really remember it was, I was in a Marshalls or something, and it was a Matt Carney song called Undeniable by Matt Carney. I remember walking through the store and being like, man, this thing sounds great, and then I was like, oh, I mixed that. It was awesome. Yeah, I mean that's a fun privilege, but again, it's I mean, I just consider myself fortunate that I'm lucky enough to be able to do stuff that actually makes it on the radio. That's an incredible that's an incredible honor, or that people want to listen to and give you feedback on. I think that's amazing.
Is there some kind of edge that you would tell somebody before they move to Nashville to be doing what you're doing? What should they focus in on? Of course, they're going to grind out, but what are the most key points that you would say to somebody as far as just how they treat people or following up or how quick they get their mixes done? Just what are a couple tips that you would give somebody?
Don't be shitty. Or, a nicer way to say that is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The golden rule. It's funny. I was just writing out a lease last night, and that's at the top of my lease. I treat people with respect, and I expect to be treated with respect. Be open, be honest, give as much as you can. Almost all of the really, really successful people that I know, when I'm having a conversation with them, they always ask, "What can I do for you?" I think that's a really good way to keep yourself open and honest, just personally, and also to be open and honest with other people. If you're moving to Nashville, if you're moving anywhere, man, especially if you're just kind of starting out, you just be a good person, have a good vibe, be ready to do whatever it takes, man. I cleaned toilets and, ran and got food for years for nothing. People come and ask for internships all the time. Usually you're like, okay, well, why don't you go clean out the attic, right? And if they knock it out and it's the best job ever, that you can trust them with other stuff. And if they're like, the attic, man, I'm not here to clean out the attic, it's like, you're not here at all.
Tell me if at some point in your career you were either mixing for free or giving away your gift for free, because I feel like that's a consistent thing that people reach this peak of success. At some point, you're showing up and you're giving as much value as you can without asking anybody for anything.
If you're good at something, never do it for free, because Ciccarelli taught me this. He was like, don't do mixes for free, because when you do it for free, they attach that value to your product. Like if you do it for nothing, that's how much they value it, right? Yep. So, there have been times when, we've all done stuff for free. Most of the time, if somebody says, hey, look, can you do this thing for like a super reduced rate? I'll just be like, no, if I like the music, I'll just do it for nothing. Yep. I'd rather do it for nothing and collect a favor, or do it for a normal rate than do it for a cut rate, because you end up, people get into this race to the bottom. Dude, you can go on Instagram right now. There's some guy mixing songs for $25 a song.
Do you think with all the tools that you have in your studio, do you think that you can mix the records with the same quality on your laptop?
Ask Billie Eilish, right?
Oh, wow. Totally.
They made an amazing record with like a Neumann microphone in a bedroom. It's a bedroom in a nice house, but it's still a bedroom. Serban Gaina is easily one of the best mixers on earth.
Yep.
And he's mixing on an old Pro Tools rig, everything in the box, with a mouse, because he found what worked for him, right? What works for him may not work for you, or may not work for me. It's the Indian, it's not the arrow, as Casey would say, I guess. And I feel privileged that I can have access to all this really cool stuff. But at the same time, limitations are a great expander of creativity. So there's never an excuse anymore, there's no excuse well, I have to be in a big studio to do this, other than stuff it's tough to cut drums in a closet, It's a lot easier to cut it in a good sounding room.
What's the most common thing that you found, working with, I guess, producers that come in with sounds from a band versus someone like myself that comes in with maybe it's a guitar amp sim, or maybe it's programmed drums? Does that change your job at all, the way you respond to a session?
Yeah, it has to. When someone's doing programmed live drums, like drums in a can, I've always found those really challenging, because it never seems to feel like an instrument, like one whole instrument. It feels like disparate parts of an instrument. I love drum programming. I love program tracks. I love real drum tracks. I've just always found it a challenge to get the, the Drumagog, or whatever sample pack you're using to really work. Some are better than others. It's pretty funny, right? Because I'll get tracks where there's 30 tracks of guitars and all these keyboards and 5 tracks of acoustic and, 30 tracks of background vocals and drums and percussion and programming and all this stuff. And it doesn't, it sounds great, and then somebody like Buddy Cannon will walk in with drums, bass, 3 guitars, an acoustic, a vocal, 1 harmony, and it sounds huge.
Yep.
And some of that has to do with the fact that, you're not putting 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag. But some of it also has to do with the fact that Buddy has been doing this forever, and he knows what he's doing, so he doesn't cut stuff that is fighting with something else. Everything has its place, and a lot of that I think is just experience.
Starting out, and even in my earlier productions, there was, I thought that you had to have so many freaking layers to create this wall of sound. And the more I produce, man, the less shit I want to do, the less stuff I want to put on there, whether it be plugins or instruments or whatever. And I feel like someone like Buddy Cannon, who comes from that old school mentality of, we're only going to record what's necessary for this track. We're not going to layer and use this time to layer a bunch of unnecessary things. It took me so long, and I'm still learning it every day, to just add the tones that are bringing something to it. All the extra layers sometimes can clutter it up. I had, stacks of 5, 6 guitars in each speaker, and now I'm trying to get to more of a creating way of using delay to spread one guitar.
I was just reading an interview with Rian Johnson, who did The Last Jedi. He was saying that he had this really great scene that they had cut with Daisy Ridley, and Mark Hamill, and it was awesome, and the acting was incredible, and he just loved it. It was one of his favorite scenes in the movie, and he ended up cutting it out of the movie. And he said, like, it pained him to get rid of that because he loved so much about it, but he realized that once they got rid of it, the pace of the movie and the storytelling was just better. So one of the hardest things to do, I think, for just everybody in general, but younger producers in particular, is to see the forest for the trees. Forest?
Yep.
Trees, see what I did there? And just be like, I really love that like sidechain gated synthesizer that I was like doing through the second verse or whatever. But you know what? Maybe the song is better. The story is better. You're more engaged with it when that distraction's not in there. And a lot of times I'll go through and I'll just strip stuff out of a song, and then you end up in a big fight where everyone's like, yeah, well, I did this thing. Can you put this back in? Can you put that back in? It's like, well, I took that out for a reason. Are you wanting it back in because it's crucial, because it makes it better, or are you wanting it back in because you're used to it? And there's an old quote like, perfection isn't achieved when you can add nothing more. It's achieved when you can take nothing more away. You got to make room for the song. You got to make room for the vocal, usually in pop tracks, and less is more a lot. So it sucks when you're working on like a ton of shit and then you hear it and it's better without it. That's frustrating. But the real people who are looking at it from altitude are trying to make it the best thing possible. And sometimes getting rid of the extra stuff that you cut is the best thing. It's just, again, it's just experience. People ask me if I master, and I was like, no, I send it to someone who's a badass at mastering and who listens to a ton of different records and can bring that perspective and bring a fresh listen. It's kind of like the same thing when you're working on a track, and then the artist comes over and you think it's like killer and you love it, and as soon as they walk in, you hear like 4 things that you wish you had changed or done differently. There should be a name for that phenomenon. That happens to me all the time. Oh, yeah. And that's a perspective shifter. Like shifting your perspective as much as you can is a really, really crucial part of creation, engineering, mixing, producing, everything. Like get up, go for a walk, listen to a different song, change to a different pair of speakers, grab a deck of oblique strategy cards and whip something out of that. Like, I mean, that's why Brian Eno created those things, to forcibly shift perspective, and it's really cool. If you're lucky enough to have success in any career that you've got, any career, I don't care what it is, at some point you have the responsibility to send the elevator back down. At some point you have the responsibility to reach out and to try and be a mentor or try and be an inspiration, because I wouldn't be where I was if I didn't have people who did that for me. So you got to pass that along. You got to pay it forward. And that's why Ross and I started the Song Farm charity, because, he was a kid in Virginia with a great football coach / theater teacher who said, man, you can totally do this. And, and Ross turned into a really great songwriter. So we said, well, what if we go back and we can help kids have access to music in schools? It's huge. We all know that a lot of kids need the creative outlet. Kids that are creative are better in just about every area of life. And shit, man, we've been really lucky. So we get to go and give back, and that's a real privilege. So yeah, I believe in that in every aspect.
I would have killed to have access to a studio in my school, just to have that edge of just a little bit of experience, because I didn't know anything about recording until I moved to Nashville. And there's a lot of places out there that don't. The only way they're consuming this is through YouTube, through Instagram, the only way they can, learn these things is if they seek it out themselves. So I think it's awesome to at least make it part of an available part of the curriculum for people that have that passion. I wanted to be out of high school as quick as I got in. If there had been a studio in my high school, dude, I would have been all over that. Well, dude, I appreciate you making time for me today. I'm not going to take too much of your time.
No worries.
I think this interview is going to help a lot of people. I assume that a lot of the people clicking on this link will be people that want to learn how to mix and learn how to do what you've done with your career. And you're just a great example of not someone that's just done well with mixing, but you've done all these other business ventures that have been successful, and you've diversified in a way that I feel like defines a true creative here in Nashville, because you not had one success and then you were gone. It's all these other things, and that's what inspires me. And I feel like that's what's going to inspire a lot of other people.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really encouraged by you doing this. I've always found you to be not only incredibly creative, but incredibly passionate. And I think that's what people need now more than ever is, we have all this information, right? And we have all of these tools. But what you really need is someone like you saying, like, you can do this. Like, we will show you how to do this. It is totally, totally within your grasp. Like, anything is possible with really hard work, especially now that we can access all of this information. So I'm honored that you would have me on your program. I think this is a really great resource, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Dude, that's awesome. Have a good weekend, man.
You too, bro.
All right, see ya.
See ya.